All right, everyone. So today is a simple how-to type of lecture. This has nothing to do with content, even though we'll bring some stuff up. This is a how to successfully write a long essay question response. And the long essay itself, it is a free response essay, and you really don't have any prior knowledge to what it's going to be, what happens. You don't have the ability to use notes. You don't have the ability to use like documents to help kind of supplement your knowledge. It's a test of your knowledge and your ability to also answer and respond to things using those essential historical thinking skills that we cover here in College Board AP. So there is, some basics to it. Number one, the College Board exam in May. 15% of that exam is made up of this particular portion of it, the long essay. There's two essays in general. There's the document-based question, which we will talk about in further date, and of course the long essay question that you can choose from. Three options when you take the test in May, and each one of those options will be presented to you. Either there will be a question that's on 1450 to 1750, there'll be one on 1750, 1900, and there won't be one from the time period 1900 to present. So whichever one you feel most comfortable with, the one that you have the most knowledge of evidence you can use to support your argument, that's the one you want to choose and use. And typically it takes somewhere between 40-45 minutes to write. If you get done sooner, that's fine, but you want to make sure that you're not going over that number, because you'll be doing the essay in the same block of time as you do the document-based question. So you have to write two essays in a block of time. So the scoring wise, you're the rubric, and if you want a copy of this, it's already available to you on Canvas. You can just load up the home page, click on the helpful resources button, and it's a link to this rubric. It's the LEQ rubric. It's 6 points, and it's broken down like this. You get 1 point for thesis, 1 point for context, successfully stating context, 1 point for using a specific piece of evidence, 1 point for using a specific piece of evidence in supporting your essay, or your claim, I should say, in your essay. And then the last 2 points, one's for the historical reasoning skill. How well do you answer the question? Because the questions are almost always asking you to show a historical reasoning skill, like comparison, causation, or change in continuity. So can you show that throughout the paper? And the last one is the complex of understanding of history point. This is certainly a point that is very hard to get, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the first thing that you need to do in order to be successful on the LEQ is to read the prompt. It seems simple enough, but it's not just read it, it's read and understand the prompt and what that question is asking you. Your ability to respond to all parts of that question makes the difference between a good essay and a terrible essay. And I can't tell you how many times in my 6 years of teaching AP, both AP US and AP World, it's 7 years now, AP US and AP World, how many times I've seen a student write this essay, and they did a very good essay on normal circumstances. However, their essay is answering a question that wasn't the prompt. And so this is the first and most important rule of writing an LEQ is ATQ, answer the question. And if you don't, then all that hard work is get for nothing. So that's really important. And later in the year, if this people still have trouble ATQing, then I'm going to have to turn it to ATFQ, answer the flippin' question. It's really the most important, and sometimes the thing that gets people into the most trouble. They start deviating and talking about stuff that has nothing to do with what the original question was. So the prompt itself, when you are looking at it, and typically when we look at the prompt and we do these in class, we do it on paper. However, in the era of COVID, we are going to be putting this online. So regardless of whether you can circle, underline, or bracket the question like I talk about here, you still need to identify these important elements of what the question is asking you. Number one, what is the subject? What are the subject areas that you are going to be responding to in this question? In this example question, it's asking you to what extent were societies in the Middle East similar to the societies of East Asia in the period from 1200 to 1450. So you have two subjects here. You're comparing the societies of the Middle East and societies of East Asia. So those are your subjects. Identify both of them. Make sure you're talking about both of them throughout your paper. The second one is underline the verb. What is the question asking you to do? And in this particular question, it's asking you to what extent are these two societies similar to each other? And when you ever get a question of to what extent, you need to answer that question. And I've talked about this in my lectures, that to what extent means either to a high extent were they similar, meaning they were very similar to each other. To a low extent, meaning they're not very similar to each other at all. To a medium extent, you can say they have similarities and differences on balance equally almost, right? So you need to be able to identify that. So to what extent, to a high, low, medium, whatever it is. And then are they similar to each other? So the other part of to what extent is that you want to acknowledge, so unless they're completely similar to each other, and in the likelihood that's going to happen is nil, you need to be able to say they were similar in these ways, but they also had differences in these ways. You need to acknowledge both sides of this. This is a question that's asking you to show the historical thinking skill of comparison. In the comparison, you should always show both similarities and differences. So after you get the prompt and you understand what the question is asking you, you should always take a few minutes to do a pre-write. Write down any ideas. In this case, you can just make a simple little T-chart and just write down what are the similarities that you can think of and the areas that you can think of, and what are the differences you can think of. All right. So then that's something that you want to kind of start, from the very beginning, writing down your ideas, because from then you can start moving into how you're going to construct your essay. If you are like, you know what, I see similarities in these areas, I'm going to write about this area and use the evidence I know about this in my essay, or the differences at the same time. So make sure you're writing down both similarities and differences in this. If this is a question that's asking you about change in continuity, you want to write about both the changes and the continuities. If it's asking you about causation, you want to write about both the causes and the effects. So this is just something you need to practice and get in your minds, that whenever you see these questions, do not just write down, because it just asked me to similar. It's asking you to evaluate to what extent. So how are they similar? How are they different? How is their change? How is their continuity? How is the causes, and what were their effects? Those are the things you need to pay attention to, okay? So once I've gotten my brainstorm and I've got a general outline of what I want to accomplish, the first paragraph is really about accomplishing two things in terms of getting the points from the rubrics. The first is context. And when you get the context, you're going to want to essentially establish what is the historical background that a reader should know in understanding what the question is and how you are going to respond to it. So context, and I've mentioned this before, when we did the Unit 0 lecture on video, I compared it to any Star Wars movie where you have this yellow, moving writing that's kind of disappearing into the background and such, and it tells you what's going on. Oh, the Empire is chasing the rebels and so forth. That is establishing context of the story of that particular film. So it's giving you this background knowledge that's important to understand what's happening as the story unfolds. Same thing's going to be with your essay. What is the historical information that kind of sets up what's going on in this part of the world or wherever and what time period that kind of explains what's going to be discussed during this essay. In order to really, for me as a teacher, I want to see your context meet this criteria. Number one, I want you to have at least 3 sentences of it, okay? 3 sentences of context. And I want some specificity in there as well, some specific example of some kind. And then number 2, you must relate it to the topic. Okay, if I go back to this example, and I start talking about in the Americas, the Aztec people were doing human sacrifice as a means to gain political control around the people of the civilizations that surrounded them. It has nothing to do with this question. It must relate to this question. Did it happen during this time period? Yes. Is it related to these subject matters? No. So make the context related to the subject of your essay. Whoops. Going the wrong way here. Okay, so an example that for this particular piece, particular prompt, I should say, this one is in circa 570, Muhammad was born in the Arabian Peninsula. In 610, he began to preach that he was a prophet of Allah. That led to the emergence of Islam, which evolved into Umayyad dynasty, and by 750, the Abbasid dynasty. In the same period as Muhammad, the Sui dynasty reunified China, ending the Three Kingdoms period of disunity. This led to prosperity that China saw in the post-classical period. So both of these questions, or both of these things that I'm stating, are basically what's the lead up to the time period 1200-1450 in these regions. Muhammad plays a humongous role in influencing societies of the Middle East. The dynasty of follows the so the Sui dynasty kind of leads up to the Tang and Song dynasty that are during this period as well. So we've related it to the topic. We've used specific pieces of evidence. I talked about Muhammad and the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties and Islam and the Three Kingdoms period and the Sui dynasty. So these are things that I've essentially accomplished in my context. And in order for you to get that point, you must do the same, whatever your prompt is. Then you're moving into the thesis, okay? So once you've established your context, you want to start responding to the question, the prompt itself. The thesis is your answer to that prompt, your claim to that prompt. And so your claim is essentially, here's how you see it. Here's how, in this case, they're similar and how they're different from each other, okay? And in what areas they're similar and different. So do not overcomplicate and speak to generalizations if you need to, but have specific areas in which you're going to explore in your paper and your body paragraphs, okay? There are 2 different styles of a thesis, both of which will get you a point if you do it correctly. But one also has an advantage over the other, and I'll talk about why that is. So let's start with a simple thesis, okay? Any thesis, whether you're doing a simple thesis or a split complex thesis, you should always use the language of the question to start your thesis, because when you do this, it's going to essentially keep you on task of writing a response directly to that question. So from this example, I mean, and give at least 3 areas of focus if you can. But for example, in this area, from 1200 to 1450 CE, the extent of which the societies of the Middle East and East Asia were similar. And so here I have used essentially the language of the question. Is it exactly? No. But I've used those important aspects of it. I've talked about, here's the time frame we're talking about and that the question's asking about. It's asking you the extent of which the societies of the Middle East and East Asia were the subjects of them. And they were similar. So it's asking you, here's that verb, right? And now here's your response to it. They were similar to each other to a high extent because of culture, technology, and economics. All right. So now I've established my 3 areas which my paper will be based around. This is my first paragraph, my second paragraph, and my third paragraph, where I have the opportunities to expand on this, on my claim, and give evidence to support it. This will get you a point. The simple thesis will get you a point. However, if you're trying to get that extra point for the historical reasoning and analysis, you want to try to do this style instead, and that's the split complex thesis, because it's then showing your understanding that to what extent there were similarities as well as differences, and you're acknowledging that directly in your thesis. Give 3 areas of focus if you can. 2 is okay, but you want to try to aim for 3. 3 is like the Goldilocks number when it comes to writing history, and especially this style of writing, right? So there are 2 ways you can write this, and so I just gave 2 examples. Although the societies of the Middle East and East Asia were culturally very different in the period of 600 to 1450 CE, they were similar to each other to a high extent because of technology and economics. So in this one, I have acknowledged there are some differences that will be brought up through the paper, but they are similar and to a high extent in these 2 areas, technology and economics. So I can essentially, here's paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and then of course I can acknowledge the differences between the 2 societies in my 3rd paragraph. Similar to what we just read here, societies in the Middle East and East Asia during the period of 1200 to 1450 were similar to a high extent because of their promotion of technology and economic exchanges. However, they differ because of the influence of religion on the social order. So it's the same thing. This one's a little more like detailed about specifically what I'm going to talk about as far as their differences go, but that shows me that you have a complex understanding of what the question's asking you. You're showing me that it's the extent of a certain degree, but also you're acknowledging the differences, which doesn't necessarily state specifically for you to do in the prompt, but to do so shows your complex understanding of history in general. So moving on to the body paragraphs. The body paragraphs, these paragraphs provide the opportunity for you to expand on that your claims, okay? So your claims are very simple to begin with, right? They're high because of culture, technology, and economics, okay? So that doesn't really tell me. Yeah, it tells me that you see it as that. You're making a claim that they are, but you need to back it up with evidence and logic and reasoning. Any argument that's made without evidence is not really an argument. It's like the old, I don't know what it's called, when a tree falls in the forest and no one's here to around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. No, or yes. But in this case, no. So if you do not have an evidence to support your argument fails and falls flat and therefore is not valid. You need the evidence to support it, okay? So you must have a claim, you must have evidence, and you must explain how that evidence supports your claim. All right. If you just simply said they're similar in technology, such as the hold on, I'm trying to think. Such as writing, that doesn't tell me anything. What writing? What does that mean? So you need to expand on it. Each paragraph of your body paragraphs should start with a topic sentence. That is essential because what that does is establishes what you're going to be arguing in that particular body paragraph, and the evidence that you're going to be stating is evidence to support your claim on that. The best way to write a topic sentence at the beginning of each one is essentially to take your thesis and use the language of your thesis and then just focus on one area. So if you want to really keep it simple, you can just simply say from 1200 to 1450, the extent of which societies in the Middle East and the East Asia were very similar to each other was high because of culture. And then you just have that paragraph about culture. Next paragraph can be all of this, and then because of technology. And then the next one could be economics. You can rewrite it and rearrange the sentence form just for your own kind of sake of like, ooh, this is really dry, but you're accomplishing what you want to accomplish. This is not, it's academic writing. It is not going to win Pulitzer Prizes in any means sometimes, but you will see phenomenally written papers. But if you're trying to accomplish what you want to set out to accomplish in terms of responding to the prompt and use the evidence and so forth, that's the simplest way to do it, okay? The example of like a topic sentence for this one, the societies of the Middle East and East Asia were culturally different to a high extent during the period of 600 to 1450. I forgot to change that. It's 1200, 1450, okay? And that mistake will come up again. Evidence, okay? The evidence has very specific, you cannot just, use a overgeneralized term. When you overgeneralize, it shows the reader that you don't really know it yourself. And people try to work their way through an essay without trying to show any knowledge. And that's just not going to work here. You have to have specific pieces of evidence. And I always tell students, when you're writing a response, you should always describe it in a way that explains it to somebody who has no prior knowledge. If I were to tell you that this man did stuff that made America great, that is not specific enough to tell me who am I describing. So you have to make sure you describe it using specific evidence pieces throughout your paper, okay? So it must be specific examples from history. It must, support your claim, and that's what you're trying to accomplish with the evidence piece. The example I've given you, so here we are, for example, in China and Song Dynasty, they practice foot binding. Specific piece of evidence right there, foot binding. And I'm also describing specific, when this happened, the dynasty. In contrast, foot binding was not part of the culture of the Middle East in 600 and 1450. By the opposite dynasty, however, the Persian culture practiced veiling, another specific piece of evidence. Women or the harem, another specific piece of evidence, had to come spread through Dar al-Islam. Okay, so that's kind of what we mean. So if you are every time we do the lectures for the content topics, I've created a Quizlet for each one of them. Go and check them out. Like, those are your strong nouns, those specific pieces of evidence that you can use in your essay. So if you want to review, use that to your advantage. The analysis, you must use historical reasoning skills to frame or structure your arguments and address the prompt. So whatever the prompt's asking you to do, whether to show comparison, causation, or change in continuity, you must do that throughout the paper if you want to get this analysis point. And how you do that is you have a thesis that addresses the prompt. You have topic sentences that are related back to your prompt, okay? Related back to your thesis. And then you have specific evidence that supports that, all your claims throughout the paper. That's how you get that point. Okay, so make sure that you are doing these small little tricks and keeping yourself on task to make sure you're answering the question in ATQ and the whole way through. Okay, the last point is called the reasoning point, and this is one that is a very elusive point. Back in 2019, when the test was given, there was one of the LEQ questions when it was scored of all the test takers that took that particular or wrote the essay on that particular prompt. Only 0.8% of the entirety of the people who took a test actually scored that point. So for that reason, sometimes referred to the appreciation point because we appreciate how good of a paper it was. I like to call it the unicorn point because no one's ever really seen one, and we don't know what it would look like. I mean, well, we would know what it looks like if we saw it, but we just don't see it, okay? That's okay. Now, if you do not, I will teach more details of ways you can get this later on. But if you don't get this point on your AP exam in May or on the essay practices in my class, that's okay. A 5 out of 6 is an excellent essay. 4 out of 6 is an excellent essay. 3 out of 6 is a good essay. A 2 out of 6 is an average essay. A 1 out of 6 needs improvement, and a 0 out of 6 should be rewritten. That's how I see it. I really don't think that you need to burden yourself with the fact that if you got 5 out of 6, that somehow your grade's going to drop and suffer. So for you Humani Grangers at home doing distance learning, don't stress it. When I put grades in for the essays, I do it on a 10-point scale. So if in this first one, if you get a 4, a 5, or a 6 out of 6 on this first essay based off the rubric, you will get 10 out of 10 points. If you get 3 out of 6, it's 9 out of 10 points. 2 out of 6, 8 out of 10 points. A 1 out of 6, 7 out of 10 points. And then even if you get 0 points and you attempt it, you'll get 6 out of 10 points. Okay. However, I will ask you to rewrite it. So this is kind of on the PowerPoint, and I would just encourage you to go back and read through this, what it looks like. I don't want to sit here and read it to you. when you can just do it on your own. But this is what it should look like when it comes down to actual writing the essay. I've done one body paragraph, what it should look like, and it's very simple, but has lots of evidence points, and it gets to the point. Here is something that shows this, culturally different. This is something that shows this. Paragraphs 2 and 3, I just did the topic sentence, what they could look like. And then a conclusion is not necessary. However, if you choose to do a conclusion, just make sure you relate it back to your thesis. The number one priority is to do that. Later on, I'll teach you how we can try to get that unicorn point by addressing the prompt or addressing information outside of the prompt that could relate in some way. This is called synthesis. It is a very difficult skill to learn. Back when it was scored by AP 3 or 4 years ago, it was one of those elusive points as well. But I'm not expecting that from you on this first essay, primarily because your depth of historical knowledge is not quite built up yet. So those are things that we'll get to more so, but it is one way that you can try to introduce one extra little element of complexity of history that may score you the actual point. Okay. So here is once again, the rubric. Make sure you go and pull this up on Canvas, take a look at it, read over it. This is very simple, 6 points and so forth. And for me, this is how I grade your quizzes. I'll put this into Canvas so you can kind of see as I grade your essays this weekend, what that kind of looks like and all of that together. Okay. So that is how to LEQ. And so on Thursday, you will have your first LEQ. And I will tell you not the prompt, but I will tell you this historical thinking skill and the time period. The time period is going to be 1200 to 1450, as it should be obvious. It's the only thing we've gone over. But the skill is going to ask you to do comparison. So go back, review, and think about how do all of these civilizations and regions and so forth, how do they compare to each other on different historical themes of AP world. So how do they interact with their environment? How do they organize their governments? How do they organize their societies and interact with each other? What are some cultural things that influences these societies? What technologies are they using in these societies compared to each other? And I'm missing one. What is it? Economics. How is the economics of these areas similar and different to each other? Okay, so think about those things, and then you'll have the prompt available to you on Thursday morning. If you have questions, for especially you distance learners who need a little more information about it, please feel free to reach out and email me on Canvas, and I will do the best of my ability to help you along. That's it for now, so make sure that you go and review. The content knowledge is key to writing an LEQ. That's it from here. Take care.